Harrison, and I'm a ninth grade teacher at Wildwood Middle High School. I teach a leadership techniques course, but I actually began my career teaching at Wildwood Elementary School as an ESE inclusion teacher. And today, the theory that I'm going to be instructing you all on is Vygotsky's sociocultural theory of development. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on it, but I have researched some pretty good things about it, and I'm just going to share it with you all today, and hopefully you guys can get some great insight and can share your thoughts with me on some of the things that you think about this theory. So first of all, let's start off with the introduction of the theory itself, which is important for me because it's going to provide you all with some background knowledge. Vygotsky's theory is that social interaction plays a very important role in cognitive development. Further, it did not focus on the individual child, but on the child as a product of social interaction, especially with adults. We're going to get to a portion later on in this presentation where it talks about when children talk to themselves in order to kind of gather their thoughts and to plan out things. So that's going to be important. Also talks about how the theory focuses on dynamic interactions rather than a child by himself or herself. And finally, people thinking differs dramatically between cultures, children versus adults, because different cultures stress different things. So all of these are important when we talk about the sociocultural development theory by Vygotsky. So once again, Vygotsky was really focused on the social interaction between children, which we know if you have children, they eat our houses up every day. And they're constantly growing. Children are constantly they're sponges, so they soak up everything. So we see that he wants to focus on children and the everyday interactions that they had with those around them, and in the development of their cognition and their higher order learning. One of the interesting things about Vygotsky is that for him to teach on a theory about young kids, he actually died at a young age. So a lot of Vygotsky's work that he actually created is unfinished because in terms of being roughly around 38 years old, he was relatively young as a researcher. So those are some things that we look at. But what we did learn and what we did recognize from everything that he did from up until the time that he passed away, we learned that it gives us a lot of insight into development, and it simply says that babies themselves had elementary mental functions, and these elementary mental functions are functions listed below: attention, sensation, perception, and memory. So of these four, we have attention, and when it comes to specifically these functions, we think about through their interaction with their environment, the sociocultural environment. These elementary mental functions are developed into more sophisticated and effective mental processes or strategies. And this is what we call our higher mental functions. The higher mental functions are important, so we'll go into that a little later. So much of our important learning that children go through happens truly through social interaction with others or through a skilled tutor or what I'll explain to you as a KMO later. Whether it's a teacher, whether it's a parent, or someone older, this tutor acts as a model to kids, and they model behaviors. They provide verbal instruction for a child, and all of these are important in how our kids learn and how they perceive the world. Kids often try to understand the actions or the instructions provided by a tutor. And furthermore, they internalize it and they use that to guide and regulate their own performances. So Essentially, I think about times when I do things and my son may see it. Sometimes he imitates me and he figures out what to do on his own simply because he watches the things that I do. And that's pretty much what KMOs, what tutors, what models, what they do for children. One of the foundational points of the sociocultural model. One of the greatest examples that I saw while I was researching this topic centered around a young girl and her father. The young girl and her father, during her first period of time where she tried to develop her learning curve, she began this by putting together a puzzle. And she pulled out all the puzzle pieces and she didn't know where to start. She didn't know where to start because this required a higher level of competence for her. And her dad sat next to her, providing her with tips and basic techniques to solve the puzzle. As she began to solve the puzzle, he told her, he said, first, I want you to start by taking all the corner and edge pieces and to separate those from the middle pieces. He gave her a couple of pieces to put together, and he kept encouraging her as she went along. So eventually she became more competent, and her father didn't have to sit next to her in order to do the puzzle. The great thing about that is one of the things that we see is that helped him sitting along her eventually helped her develop a level of independent learning, which is what essentially happens in the higher mental functions. Kids develop an independent learning and thinking. But that can only be cultivated by the elementary mental functions that she already learned, such as attention, sensation, perception, and memory, which all involve a tutor or someone older who acts as a guide of the model behavior in which we act out. According to Vygotsky, this type of social interaction involves cooperative as well as collaborative dialogue back and forth, and that's what promotes for our kids, and particularly kids in higher mental functions, cognitive ability, which also supports their development. In the particular example that I use, it discusses how her dad was an MKO. I think I said earlier KMO, but an MKO, which is a more knowledgeable other. That more knowledgeable other, as Vygotsky defines it, is basically someone who has a better understanding or a higher ability level than the learner, which in this example, the daughter was the learner and the dad was the MKO. And further, he had a better understanding of how the puzzle was put together. So being that he had a better understanding of how the puzzle was put together, he was able to guide and instruct his daughter on how to put this together. An MKO plus self equals a higher mental functioning. When you add yourself, which is essentially in the story that I told was the little girl, and you added her dad, that combined together helped her reach that higher mental functioning, which also provided a better understanding or higher learning ability for this young lady that was trying to put together the puzzle. Now, the second key term that Vygotsky spoke about was a ZPD, or a zone of proximal development, which essentially is the most sensitive instruction or guidance or area that guidance should be given to the student. I took the liberty of finding an example figure that pretty much highlighted exactly what zone of proximal development represents. I started out with this box, and this box represents everything that a kid can't do. Then we get a closer look inside the circle, And this circle represents everything that the kid can do. And the ZPD, which is the zone of proximal development, once again, represents everything that gets meshed in between the two of what they can do and what they can do. And that zone of where they're most sensitive to either go left, which may be positive, or right, which may be negative. And that box represents what's beyond our reach. And so, once again, within the circle represents everything that we can do in our current state without any other assistance. So, once again, according to ZBD, according to Vygotsky, the ZPD is actually the internal link between the two, which is important to know because a lot of times there may be skills that we already have and use on our own, but some we can't use because there are areas that we can't go or areas that we can't do. So it's important to take advantage of the ZPD, which involves interaction with a higher learner, a tutor, a teacher, which is where we as teachers come into play as being very important to the overall development of our kids. One of the last terms that I want to talk about as it pertains to Vygotsky is a key term of language. Language for our children oftentimes is the main means by which adults transmit information to children. And it's also a powerful tool of adapting intellectually. When we look at internal speech, or also known as private speech, one of the things that during the research that I researched is that internal speech, private speech, when you think about people that walk around talking to themselves or trying to figure things out, a lot of times those people are normally children. Children talk out loud to themselves all the time. And sometimes you just look at them like, what are they talking about? But in actuality, when children do that, they're actually talking out loud to themselves as a means to plan activities and strategies. And I think that's important because Vygotsky sees that as a way for children to aid in their development. This act of speaking to themselves or talking out loud is an accelerator for thought, for them thinking and for them understanding. So children who truly engage in large amounts of private speech are actually more socially competent than children who don't use it as much. He believed that language develops from social interactions for communication purposes, and later language ability becomes internalized as thought. So as we grow older, it becomes more internalized, which is called essentially, once again, our private speech or our inner speech. That ability to think for ourselves and develop the independence of executing skills comes from the importance of language. So once again, you have as a part of this theory, you have language, you have MKO, which is a more knowledgeable other, which essentially is a teacher, a tutor, a motivator. And then you have the zone of proximal development, which is the most sensitive instruction area of instruction, or where guidance should be given. Now, once again, I don't claim to be an expert. I don't claim to be an expert on this, but I hope that I kind of open you up to some points of Vygotsky and maybe introduce you to some new things that you haven't learned for some of our other wonderful instructors that are here teaching you this class. If you liked it, add some comments, and hopefully I can learn a lot more about different types of theories from you guys as you do your presentations. But other than that, it's Mr. Harrison signing off, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Good luck.